It's alive! Oh, in the name of God! Now I know what it is.
Watch it, jerk. Oh! Dork. Jesus, this place is packed tonight, man.
We had a run in the mass murder section.
Coming to my fiesta?
Yeah, I'm off early. Curfew, you know?
Cool.
What's that werewolf movie with E.T.'s mom in it?
The Howling, horror, straight ahead.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, now that's in poor taste.
What?
If you were the only suspect in a senseless bloodbath, would you be standing in the horror section?
What? It was just a misunderstanding. He didn't do anything.
You're such a little lapdog. He's got killer printed all over his forehead.
Okay. Really? Why'd the cops let him go, smart guy?
Because obviously they don't watch enough movies. This is standard horror movie stuff. Prom night revisited, man.
Yeah? Why would he want to kill his own girlfriend?
There's always some stupid bullshit reason to kill your girlfriend. That's the beauty of it all. Simplicity. Besides, if it gets too complicated, you lose your target audience.
Well, what's his reason?
Maybe Sydney wouldn't have sex with him.
What, is she saving herself for you?
Maybe. Now that Billy tried to mutilate her, do you think Sid would go out with me?
No, I don't at all. No. You know what I think it is? I think it's her father. Why can't they find her pops, man?
Because he's probably dead. His body will come popping up in the last reel somewhere. Eyes gouged out, fingers cut off, teeth knocked out. See, the police are always off track with this shit. If they watch Prom Night, they'd save time. There's a formula to it. A very simple formula. Everybody's a suspect.
So that's a clip of Scream. And welcome to this Dark Ages International Film Festival panel as we celebrate the 25th anniversary of Wes Craven's feature. And joining me on this special panel for our festival is three horror-loving enthusiasts. I'm joined by Gav Logan from the Fright Club NI.
Hello.
I'm joined by Zara Jackson, local podcaster. Zara Jackson.
Hi.
And PhD researcher John Kavanagh.
Hello.
Hi guys, so we're going to be talking about Scream. We're going to be looking back. We'll talk specific. I think we'll try to be as specific about the first film, but I feel undoubtedly we will stray into conversations about Scream 2, Scream 3, Scream 4. We may even talk about the TV series if you really want. I don't know. If you really want to talk about the TV series, we can. And then, of course, we have, well, some are calling it Scream Legacy. It's now just kind of, with the new trailers, it's been called Scream. But we will undoubtedly at some point come on to talk about that. So, Gav, I'm going to come to yourself. We'll just kind of start generally here. I mean, I kind of say, so it's 25 years since Scream. I actually got the chance to see it on the cinema. It was re-released in cinemas here and everywhere, really. And I know at the Dark Ages we were going to Scream as part of the festival, and then kind of everyone kind of beat us to it. So it doesn't mean we can't have a panel. But take us back to 25 years. How old were you? Can you remember kind of how old were you, Gav? I'm going to say you're my safe bet here. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but I'm going to say you're my safe bet because I see two other very fresh faces, but it could be the beard, Gav. It could be I've got rid of the beard, and my wife can't even look at me anymore. So I'm gonna say the beard. Was this a film that kind of hit you in around about as we always kind of say, like the right time?
Yeah, absolutely, it was. I was 13 years old when this film came out, and I actually went to the cinema to see it on opening weekend.
No way.
I was old enough. I was able to squeeze in. I looked about 19 when I was 13. So
did you have the beard even when you were 13?
Pretty much, yeah. I had some sort of beard going on anyway. But it was me and a few other friends had been quite excited about this film. We were horror fans. I was a horror fan growing up. Always loved going to the video store and renting the films that I shouldn't have been watching. Well, it's my big sister that rented them for me, but I loved horror films. I'm a big fan of Nightmare on Elm Street. That's one of my favorite horror films of all time. Directed by obviously the same director of Scream. So when Scream came out, I was made a beeline for the cinema, and it was one of those films that I suppose kind of cemented my horror fandom because it just completely blew me away. I didn't know anything about it before, other than the fact that it was about some sort of serial killer, and I'd seen the trailer and the images of Ghostface, and I mean, Ghostface mask is absolutely iconic now, but back then, it was just this crazy image, and it just I was obsessed with it. So whenever I went to see it in the cinema, I absolutely loved it. And I was a horror fan, but I didn't really know anything about the horror genre or horror films or horror history back then. Obviously, I was only 13. But since the Scream film has come out, I went to the cinema to see everyone, apart from 4. I didn't see 4 until it came out on DVD. But the first film is completely iconic, and it really, for me, I think it rejuvenated the horror genre. It reinvented the slasher genre, and it made a lot of young film fans love horror. And even if they didn't enjoy horror, after rewatching it when the other films came out, it sort of helped them to fall in love with the genre.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you said. I'm slightly shocked at 13 you got in to see Scream in the cinema. I can't remember, was it a 15 or was it an 18 upon? It's an 18 surely when it was released.
No, I think it was only a 15.
Was it? Okay. Well, that's what you're not gonna name and shame. Was it a Ballymena cinema?
No, it was a Ballymena cinema, yeah.
Okay, but you're not gonna name and shame. That's okay.
No.
I would have been slightly older, so I was 15 when this came out. So I was kind of right on the I would say kind of being right on the money at the right time. I didn't see it. I didn't see Scream in the cinema though, because it just kind of passed me by. But it's one of those films, as I said earlier, like right at the right time. I remember like school friends and people in school talking about Scream. Had you seen Scream? Talking about Ghostface and this, that, and other. So the first one I would have got to see in the cinema was Scream 2, which I didn't realise until I was looking back and research for this, how quickly it was released after the first. Like, I think it's a year later. And, yeah. I mean, as I say, we'll probably talk about Scream 2 at some point. I think it's a pretty... For a film that was clearly rushed into production, I think it's a pretty solid... It has its flaws, like all those films, but I think it's a pretty solid sequel to the film, to the first film. But yeah, I remember Scream 2 was the first one I got to see in the cinema. It was something... I don't want to repeat everything you said, Gav, because I would probably agree with a lot of what you said in that sense that it was one of those films that solidified my love of horror. I had been familiar with horror. I'd always kind of... I remember picking up... I've talked about on the podcast before, picking up a copy of my father had recorded from TV on VHS of Nightmare on Elm Street. And this is kind of parenting 101. Was basically told, I want to watch this. And Dad was like, well, you know what? You want to watch it? It's on you. If you get scared shitless from watching this, it's not on me. It's all on you. And so I would have watched stuff like Nightmare on Elm Street. I would have watched stuff like The Fog, John Carpenter, Halloween, was just kind of something I would have watched regularly. And this was one of those first films I remember in the cinema and just kind of solidifying my love. And just when you look back at it and just on something that you mentioned, what I love about Scream is it gives you a reference point to horror movies you would want to go and watch, like Prom Night and things like that. And you want to say, right, well, they talk about that in Scream, so I want to go and watch that. And I'm sure we'll talk about this as we go on, the sense that Scream is meta and it's referencing the horror genre, and it's the first time I can really think of that I can remember of a horror film acknowledging the existence of horror movies and acknowledging them. But I mean, I don't know, John, you are a researcher, you're specialising in slasher movies. You might tell us that we're wrong at that point, but go and depress me, John. How old were you when Scream came out?
I was 4 whenever Scream came out.
Well, you're alive. 5. You're alive. That's a positive. That's okay. But for you, so Scream obviously didn't hit you upon its release unless you're really hardcore into horror. Even more hardcore than Gav at 13. So when can you remember kind of when? We could ask the broad question about when you started to be seduced by the horror genre's charms, and then kind of what role I suppose specifically Scream and kind of more broadly, Wes Craven played in drawing you in to the genre?
Well, my parents used to own a corner shop, and they had a VHS display. They rented out VHSs. So as soon as Scream was released on VHS, I remember the cover, but I wouldn't actually watch it for a few years. I think it was around the point where Scream 2 had been out for a while on VHS that I had watched Scream 1 and Scream 2, and then eventually watched Scream 3 whenever that was out on VHS. And that's where my love of history was born, in the VHS stand, grabbing whatever I could on a Friday night and watching them. And Wes Craven would come around a bit later because I was pretty much stuck with whatever was coming out at the time. And Nightmare on Elm Street was one of those moments where I realized I love this subgenre. This is fantastic. And that being one of the earlier self-referential slasher films, even though most people would agree that it's 1994 at that point starts that. Funnily enough, with Wes Craven again with a New Nightmare. But on and off, a lot of different films I was watching around that point, and it wouldn't be until the early 2000s where I started really getting into horror. Like, I started owning them around the time where DVD releases were becoming standard. So what you're talking about, 2002, 2003.
Okay.
So just horror's just always been a part of my life, pretty much.
Yeah, like, I mean, I suppose all of us can kind of say, like, I mean, the good old days, and you get a bit rose tinted glasses here when you think back to the days of Extravision and your local video rental store. When I know I would have went to the horror genre. The horror genre just had the best, those VHS, those DVDs. This had the best covers. I just wanted to. I mean, I think is it like Reanimator is one I always kind of think of, and stuff like that. That just I want to watch that film based purely on the cover. And yeah, just when you mentioned like the Scream, it's just, isn't it Drew Barrymore's face, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
All whited out with her covering her mouth. It's a fantastic looking cover.
Yeah, it's great...
flipped as well. It's not actually her face; it's like flipped this way, and they've changed the color of her eyes as well for some strange reason.
Yeah,
but it's
also to make it look more strange and appealing and just uncanny.
Yeah. Oh, it's a great cover. It's a great poster image. Zara, what about you? Going to press us. How old were you when Scream was released?
I actually wasn't born, guys. No, I'm kidding. I was 3. I was 3 in 1996. And my first memory of Scream and those kind of sort of tame-ish scary films, I would say, was sleepovers, because that was where you could watch any kind of film. The parents had gone to bed. It was sort of like, should we stick on Final Destination? Like, are we all feeling okay? Like, we're all with each other. We've got each other. We're in a safe space, So that was where I experienced those kinds of films for the first time. And I remember thinking the opening was just so class, and the back and forth and the conversation. And I know that it's well documented now, the discussions about Drew Barrymore being this well-known actress and the fact that she's killed off so quickly and, subverting expectations, I think is something that the Scream did really well. And the fact that it had to always kind of reinvent itself was something that really drew me to it. I wasn't really a horror fan. I would sort of say whenever I saw like covers in Extravision of like Hellraiser with the spikes, I was like, I'm good. I'm gonna go back over here. And yeah, I was kind of like, but those kinds of films like Scream and things like Scary Movie that kind of parodied it and made it not as scary were the first films that I remember thinking, actually, horror is something that I could maybe get into slowly. It was maybe more of like a gateway film for me, because I wasn't ever really that big into it. But those kinds of films were definitely, it was like, it's okay. This is actually a good genre. You can enjoy parts of it.
Yeah, you've mentioned Scary Movie. I do want to come back to that because Scary Movie has kind of ruined Scream for me, if I'm brutally honest. In that sense that, I don't mean in that sense that it's ruined. I think Scary Movie's better than Scream in any way, but particularly in that opening sequence. When I went to see this, I think it was the 19th of October, I think this was re-released in cinemas. I went to cinema, and particularly that opening sequence with Drew Barrymore, I kept kind of in my head getting sequences from Scream and Scary Movie. Like, I'm like, at what point do they run past the popcorn and it's just a huge big ball of popcorn? And there's so many sequences, because I mean, Scary Movie, I'm not a huge fan of it, because I think it just literally just there's points where it just lifts reams of dialogue from Scream, and you know, it wears its references as knowingly as it can, but there's just certain sequences in Scary Movie that have now ruined Scream for me forever. But I don't know about you, but you know, I don't know if any of you, I know Gav, I don't think you were saying before we actually started to record, you haven't been to the cinema for a while, so John and Sarah, I don't know if either of you went to see Scream when it was re-released, but whilst there's aspects of it, and I suppose I'm kind of jumping the gun, and I'll not go into it too much, there's certain sequences or certain aspects of Scream I think have undoubtedly dated, just because of in terms of technology, like let's call 911 on our computer with the worst dial-up connection ever, but I still think it feels like a very fresh horror film, in the same sense that I would argue John Carpenter's Halloween, whilst the tameness of it, in the fact that there's no blood or gore, I think it still looks at, and that is why films like Scream and films like Halloween, they still stand the test of time, because they I can't put it any other way, they do stand the test of time. There's a timeless quality to them. They look as fresh now. Yes, there's certain aspects, as I've mentioned, that have dated. I also feel we probably should go into kind of some of the kind of, and I was mentioning this to Leo McGuigan, local filmmaker, who's a huge Scream fan, and from rewatching it, and I don't know, as I say, I'll come back to you both, where when you all last watched Scream, there's certain aspects of it, I think, regarding the sexual politics of it, I think have dated horribly. I know that the kind of the references with Sydney and her virginal status is a plot point, and it is a device, and it is looking at the horror genre. There's aspects of that I think have dated horribly by today's standards, but I don't want to turn this into, not that I have a criticism of that, but I don't want to turn this into a woke send up and kind of pulling apart Scream, because I don't think that's not what I mean, but I do think there's aspects of it have dated in terms of its sexual politics. For all of you guys, when's the last time you watched, I suppose, any of the films within the series? Start with you, Gav.
I rewatched the first one about a month ago. I always try to watch it around Halloween time, or the run up to Halloween kind of kicks off the Halloween period for me. I haven't watched the other ones in quite a while, but I agree pretty much with everything you said there, Jim, that I feel like Scream, or with what Sarah said about it being a gateway, or for a lot of people, this is going to sound a bit pretentious, but I do feel like it transcends the genre, and that it opened up a lot of doors for people to become horror fans. And it let's be real, it's a fucking cool movie. Like, it's a really cool movie, whether you're a horror fan or not. You know, I really love the mystery, the whodunit aspect of it, and I feel like that kind of influenced a whole generation of films that came after it. But yeah, I haven't watched any of the sequels in a long time, but the first one, I always try to watch it every year.
Yeah, so same as me. I mean, it's just one of those films I'll find myself, not necessarily just at Halloween, for some weird reason. Well, I think that you always have that link with horror and gothic horror around Christmas time. I always find myself watching a few horror films around Christmas. But yeah, it is a fucking cool movie. We've got an expletive rating. It is fucking cool, and it's clever, and Wes Craven's a clever filmmaker. He's someone, he's a school teacher. He's a smart guy. And I love kind of, I've read, it's a while now since I've read it, and I was tempted to try and see if I could pick it up again and reread it before this panel. I just haven't had the chance, because just with what I've been doing. But the biography about him, it just kind of shows kind of the deep thought he put into his films. And he's a director that, unlike so many, has been able to reinvent himself. Going from like The Last House on the Left, then to move into Nightmare on Elm Street, and then we kind of come into the Scream era, and I would even put into that as well. I know it wasn't as much of a box office success, but even like the People Under the Stairs, I think, such an underrated horror film. And John, I know you mentioned it, and it's a film we've screened in the past as part of the festival. As part of when we were more a film club rather than a film festival. But Wes Craven's New Nightmare is such a clever film. It just doesn't have, I think, the mainstream appeal that Scream has. That kind of that look at pop culture and kind of bringing that in mainstream culture in the way that Wes Craven's New Nightmare kind of looked at it much more. Like, you look at Wes Craven's New Nightmare, you kind of see parallels with Pranyo Bailey Bond's Censor, in that sense of it's looking at the effect the horror genre has, not on censors, but on the people that made the films and the people that are watching them. I mean, you've mentioned it, John. Wes Craven's New Nightmare is, again, an equally fucking fantastic film. And if anyone watching this hasn't seen New Nightmare, I would definitely recommend seeking it out. So there's a point, John, where I come to you then. When was the last point you watched Scream? And you're going to dutifully tell me, I watched it last night or recently in preparation for this panel.
Well, you're definitely going to be pleased. I watched all 4 this week in prep for this. And I also watched a few more Kevin Williamson films because it feels more to me like a Kevin Williamson film rather than a Wes Craven film. I know that's a controversial statement because there is a lot of Wes Craven stamps on there. But Kevin Williamson's just so much more accessible than Wes Craven, because whenever Wes Craven wants to go off the rails, he will. Like, if you look at A New Nightmare, it's very cerebral in a way that most people don't want for a popcorn flick. They go on to A Nightmare on Elm Street and they think we'll get some fantastic set pieces, but we won't necessarily descend into hell, which we do within the film. And then what was that film that he had done? The Serpent and the Rainbow was another weird self-referential one he did. I'm a fan of it, but it becomes A Nightmare on Elm Street by the end. It's this great look at almost a critique of the white science versus black magic and showing, the reality of that, but then it descends into a parody of itself, where white science is supreme. So with the Kevin Williams stuff, Kevin Williamson is what makes Wes Craven more accessible to the 90s audience, if you get what I mean. Because, he would come out the next year, he would release Scream, he would write Scream 2, and he would write the script for I Know What You Did Last Summer, and then he'd jump in for The Faculty. These are a lot of films that were seen to redefine the genre. But no, I watched a lot of them this week, and I'm not a massive fan of this era of the slasher film. I'm a bigger fan of the classical era. Because it feels like a lot of the times the films present themselves as a deconstruction of the slasher subgenre, whereas it's more referential rather than, interacting with it the way that most would believe. It's kind of uses, has anybody read the book Man, Woman, and Chainsaw by Carol Clover?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of uses that as its base and jumping off point for a lot of the stuff that it interacts with. But I also watched it in the cinema a few years ago because I know it was re-released then as well, close to the same time Halloween was re-released. And maybe you were saying that audiences, a lot of people, like, this holds a very special place for them, and it holds up so well. Fantastic response from that audience in the cinema whenever we seen Scream. The fans were holding on every moment. They were gasping. They were terrified. But a few weeks earlier at Halloween, it was a cinema that was filled with laughter. So it was almost like a lot of modern audiences couldn't watch Halloween, but they ate up Scream, whereas I would be a massive fan of Halloween.
Well, it's weird, and it's funny you say that, because I remember getting, and I know Gav said earlier on he didn't want to come across as arrogant, but I remember this is where I will come across as arrogant. I remember going to see when the QFT did their QFT Lates, and they did a late night screening of Wes Craven's of Nightmare on Elm Street, and just the audience that was there with they weren't because there's a difference, and I mean we can all tell that when an audience is laughing with a film, not so much they kind of laughing with them and laughing at the film. And I can remember getting very grumpy and very annoyed at that audience at the QFT because they just found every bit of cheesy dialogue, every aspect of it, and I just got really grumpy and really annoyed. And yeah, words might have been muttered loudly as I stomped home that evening on the street. But yeah, you get that, and I agree with you because I remember when the 2018 version of Halloween came out. A lot of cinemas that night did midnight screenings of the new film, and then they screened Halloween just before it, and audiences did find it funny, and I again come back to there's certain aspects kind of like the kind of is it the see anything you like kind of I laugh at that now, but I always say there's a difference with an audience when they're laughing at something and it's laughing with something and laughing at something. And you will always get that with certain films. And I saw this a couple of weeks ago at the movie house here in Cityside, and you got a few. There's certain aspect, as they come back, as I've mentioned, but audiences will sometimes find stuff funny that you're like going, that's not funny. Why are you laughing? But I'm just old and grumpy. Zara, what about you? Have you done all your homeworks for this pod? When's the last time you watched Scream or I suppose any of the installments within the series?
The last time I watched Scream was at the start of the year, which is kind of a random time to watch Scream. But I watched clips and I watched the opening sequence because, I mean, just incredible. And I wanted to read a little bit more about what audiences thought at the time, because obviously we've got the trailer for the 5th installment. And I wanted to kind of think about what's changed in terms of what we know about horror, what all audiences expect, because it's a well-known brand at this point. And, it'll obviously play into nostalgia, tropes that we'll recognize. And, the creators know that there's an audience there already. So it'll probably play to that, but then there has to be some twist. There has to be something that engages new audiences. And I mean, people who were teenagers when they watched it, they'll probably bring their teenagers, because they'll kind of already have established a viewer base there. But so I'm kind of interested to see, that was kind of more what I was reading into, like what kind of the reception was, how it was viewed at the time. Even Neve Campbell said in one of the really early interviews on set, she said, we were talking about whether people would wear the costume at Halloween, and then we were like, no, that's silly, it won't be that big a film. And then it's like such an iconic, like Ghostface is such an iconic mask, costume, everything now. So it's really funny to even think that they just thought, oh, it's just gonna be a little film, it's just gonna sneak away. And then how popular it got.
Yeah, I remember kind of looking back, as you say, I think they were all genuinely surprised, and I think that's kind of why they decided to strike when the iron is hot and green it a sequel so quickly. I know, John, you've mentioned Kevin Williamson, because Kevin Williamson is someone who's had a bit of a problematic relationship with the Scream franchise since the release of the first film. There's a couple of times, I think, I don't know about 2, but I think definitely with 3 and definitely with 4, I think there's been issues where kind of other people have been brought on board to polish scripts, tweak, change and adapt things, because I know there's been a lot of ideas they've kind of talked about, and I do wonder kind of if those ideas and certain characters we maybe thought that were dead and gone by the end of the first film will maybe resurface. I know there's a lot of internet rumors about one character, and I'm kind of hoping that they don't go down that way. I will be intrigued to see what they do with Scream 5, Scream Legacy, Scream, or as it's now just been called, because this is going to be the first one that's been made without any real involvement from Wes Craven. It's going to be interesting, and the directorial duo that are on board. I'm a massive fan. Was it Ready or Not? I think was out. Wasn't Ready or Not the film that they did? I thought that was fantastic. I had a lot of fun watching it. I didn't consider it overly scary, but I thought it was a lot of fun to sit back and watch it. And I think maybe they are the right people right now to kind of come in and take on board the Scream franchise. I'm going to come back to you, Zara, just to kind of push you. Kind of anything else from your kind of reading at the time that you picked up? You've mentioned there with Neve Campbell, but anything else you kind of like for you? Just looking back, were you surprised at the reaction at the time in terms of film? Overly positive, overly negative, mixed, or what?
I think the marketing was super effective. I mean, I think the creators knew their audience and they knew who they were kind of trying to target. And we're talking about how the film is kind of self-aware in that it relates to other horror films. And that happened more and more as the sequels came out. And I think you have to know your audience, but you also have to know what's been done before in the genre so that you're you're carving a new path while you're making these references. So it's something new, but it also harkens back to nostalgia. And I think that's what makes the films really effective. There was an article on, I had to write this down because I knew I wouldn't remember it, hyper postmodernism, which is my new favorite word, by Valerie Wee. And she said, with the release of each installment in the series, the conventions of the genre were repeated and consolidated. The growing popularity of these films was in fact tied to the increasing familiarity of these conventions. So the fact that audiences knew what to expect, but they also wanted a twist, is kind of what really intrigued me. And when I was just reading up on it, that came back time and time again. People were saying about this kind of juxtaposition of wanting familiarity, wanting to know that you know it's going to be a group of friends, you know there's going to be somebody connected to the group of friends, it's going to be a kind of thriller mystery, you're going to have to kind of solve these crimes as you go along with the characters, but there's always going to be something that kind of twists and turns. And again, I think that self-awareness is just something that really, it spoke to me and made it really enjoyable for me to watch.
Yeah, they're Agatha Christie movies. They really are. You can see the influence of Agatha Christie on all of the Scream movies. In that sense of, it's the kind of the classic whodunit. Like in the case of Scream 1, it genuinely took me by surprise. Okay, as I say, I was 15, 16 when I watched it for the first time. Scream 2, I think we all kind of went collectively, what? Who? Oh, okay, I get that. Okay. Scream 3, and again, we can talk about the Scream 3 is a film for me, I think, now in the post-Me Too era, I think there's layers to it that I think are, you can look at it both positively and negatively, because let's not forget, like, Harvey Weinstein was involved in these films, and Scream 3, when you're looking at the sins of Hollywood and the sins, we look at Weinstein now, there's almost an ironic sense to that, seeing his name pop up at the start of the credits. But Scream 3, I think, for me, I've looked at it kind of, I was lukewarm when I first seen it. I don't like the kind of the changing of the classic voice, the voice changer that can imitate other people's voices. I think that's a silly gimmick and a misdirection. Scream 4 is one of the weird ones, because Scream 4 is the one, when I don't watch it for quite some time, I go, I quite like Scream 4. I think it's maybe clever. And then I go back and rewatch it and I go, oh no, okay, there's things I like about it, things I don't like about it. And I remember at the time when I first watched it going, oh, I quite like this twist in the ending. It's like, and then when you watch it for the second time, you go, oh, that's really stupid. That's really clumsy. And then you watch it for a few years and you go, oh, maybe Scream 4 wasn't as bad. Or, yeah, it was quite clever. And you, no. So I don't know. Gav, we'll come to you kind of, as I say, we kind of generally, I've kind of mentioned there, these are Scream, the enduring appeal is that they're Agatha Christie movies, the classic whodunit. We can see kind of the influence, like the finger marks of Hitchcock are all over. Like the finger marks of Hitchcock in that opening sequence is just a love letter to Psycho. We have, instead of Janet Leigh, we have Drew Barrymore popping up just to pretty much say hello, goodbye. But yeah, I know we're kind of moving slightly away, but why do you think a film like Scream appealed? Like, it's not just our generation. I feel really old saying that. It's not just our generation, but it's a film that has been able to regenerate a new fan base. It's something that's going for. I don't know whether they're picking it up from I hope not, from the MTV series. I really hope not. But maybe that's a good thing in its own way. I don't know. I don't hate the TV series. I just don't think it's very good. But why do you think is it just the sense that it is just a really good, let's break it down. It is a really good whodunit? In that sense, we take away the slasher movie, we take away the pop culture references. At its heart, and the central juxtaposition is the fact that it's just a really well done, well executed whodunit.
It's Scooby-Doo. That's really all it is. We all watched Scooby-Doo when we were kids, or some of us are too young to watch Scooby-Doo, but me and you definitely watched it, Jen, when we were younger. But yeah, it's the twist as well. Obviously, it's full of twists and turns and the mystery element, and it's asking the audience the question, who do you think the killer is at different points of the movie, and it drops little hints and clues and teasers in there. And if you go back to the likes of Friday the 13th, when we had Pamela Voorhees, all those POV shots of her killing the victims,
And her
you
hairy
know,
knuckles.
and yeah, exactly. Um, you know, obviously you were guessing with that as well, but with this one, you know, it's done in a different way where it's dangling the carrot constantly, and it's basically saying this is the killer, and then in the next scene it says no, actually we fooled you. It's not that's not the guy who's done it. And I think the major twist of the first film isn't the fact that it's her boyfriend. I think it's the fact that there's two killers, or there's two, you know, there's two ghost faces. Nobody could have guessed that, I don't think, anyway. And I don't think anyone would have guessed that there was two killers. And you know, they did carry that on to the second one. And I feel with the fourth one, I like the fourth one, but you know, you get to a point where when you watch these films, your first instinct is to say, who is the person that I would least suspect, and then it's going to be that person. Which I really hope they don't go into that territory with the new one. I feel like they might do that, and you know, they've already said about the trailer and how the trailer is, you know, it's a red herring in itself. So it'll be interesting to see. But I just think that it has endured for so long because it always keeps the audience guessing. And of course, just the way that it's written, I would agree about the Kevin Williamson scripts. I think they're really sharp, and I think it's obviously it's a young cast in most of these films. So the people that enjoyed it that are a little bit older are being fed nostalgia. You know, the Halloween references, you know, the Jamie Lee Curtis references. But the younger audiences are watching it because it's a young, sexy cast, and it's, as I said, it's a cool movie. But yeah, it will continue to endure for years to come, and I think it's just a huge brand now. So I'm scared for the new movie, but I'm really excited. So I just really hope they do it justice.
Yeah, I would agree with you, because it's weird in the same sense that Freddy Krueger kind of went from being, you know, a child murdering pedophile to, you know, pop culture figure who kind of kids would happily, because we were talking about this the other day, not so much about Freddy Krueger, but isn't it weird how when, you know, you were younger, we had toys for Aliens, and I think Aliens is an adult series, and it's like kind of, I remember buying toys for that. I remember having toys for that, but I couldn't watch the film. But I knew the toys. I knew about the Alien Queen before I'd ever seen the film because I got it from the toys. And it's weird because when you look back and you think of how Ghostface, you know, we've mentioned Scary Movie. I think, doesn't Ghostface, because it's only because I rewatched it over lockdown, both The Wire and The Sopranos. I think there's a Ghostface reference in The Sopranos. I'm nearly certain. I think there's a robbery, I think. And they have Ghostface masks. There's I think the one I do love, again, I mentioned Scary Movie, was Jay & Silent Bob Strike Back, when it's just we have, because then it gets meta, because then they're in, I think they have an appearance in Scream 3. I think there's a kind of a passing reference to Jay & Silent Bob in Scream 3, but it's like kind of just Wes just kind of sitting there like, you really give up now, Wes, haven't you? You just don't care, and it's the monkey. And you're just kind of going, yeah, because that is my concern too, in the fact that how do you make Ghostface scary? Because I think the fact that what makes Ghostface scary in the first one is that it could be anyone. It's a teenager, and you kind of think, you know, what has been the effect? It's coming back to something Wes Craven was fascinated by, that sense of what is the effect of horror. Like, I think Wes Craven would love a film like Censor. I genuinely think that would be the type of film that I think he would aspire to make, and a film that he would love to kind of psychoanalyze and read into and look at the deeper meaning, because he's someone that was obsessed by that, fascinated by that. He was fascinated by that sense of, you know, the viewing cinema as the dreamscape, and kind of looking at kind of the dream and reality. You know, we've seen that with Nightmare on Elm Street and New Nightmare. But yeah, I don't know, because in the sense that he was able to kind of, for one film, albeit for one film, reclaim Freddy Krueger and make him scary again with New Nightmare. And I've always loved the story. I'm sure you've all heard it. The story about, I think, because Wes Craven was someone like Stoker, he was influenced by his own dreams. And he talked about kind of, there's a dream he had for an idea that formed the genesis, the idea for New Nightmare, when he was, I think he dreamt he was at a party, and he seen Robert Englund dressed up as Freddy Krueger and kind of dancing and acting the jig and just being a bit of a buffoon. And then I think there was a dark shadow that was imitating everything that Robert Englund's character was doing, and that was kind of the genesis of that kind of idea for New Nightmare. And he did, whether you love New Nightmare or not, it's not a perfect film. I think in what he was trying to do and be meta and look into the horror genre and be self-referential within the horror genre, I would agree with you, John. I think that Kevin Williamson brought in a polish that New Nightmare needed. I think New Nightmare was bar the better use of a word, was too dry, I think, at times, for its own good. It had some nice ideas, but I think it never really was never going to have the same broad appeal as something like Scream would have, because it's kind of much more, as Gav put it, it's got sexy cast. Because remember, Gav, we were around that time, we were all young and sexy.
Oh, yes.
Now we've just got, well, you've got more of a beard. I shaved the beard by accident, but we're just improving with age. We're like a fine wine. John, right. I want to come back to something you said, because you kind of said you kind of prefer the older slashers that weren't kind of self-aware, and then kind of, because there's undoubtedly a fact that Scream had an impact on that. Scream was kind of like, it's like everything now when you see it, it's like, well, when producers see what's hot and see what's working with horror goers and cinema goers at the audience, they all feel that they have to be self-aware and self-referential. But where then do you place, you've said you have a fondness for Scream, so where do you place Scream within that, if you've kind of got a love-hate with the relationship with the self-referential style of the horror genre at times?
Well, what do you mean? Where do I place it?
Where do you place it in that sense that you're not a fan of the kind of postmodern kind of self-referential horror? You prefer the older style horror that isn't self-aware. So where do you place that when you've got a film like Scream that is clearly the catalyst for that?
Well, it's horror had been becoming self-referential for a while, like Candyman. It's a self-referential slasher. It's about the idea of myths becoming real because you believe it. The Candyman isn't a real monster. He is a myth that at some point became reality. And even the slasher films of 1989 were quite self-referential at times. You know, Michael Myers isn't just this beast running around. He's actually got a runic tattoo on his arm. And
nobody wants to talk about that, John. Nobody wants to talk about the Curse of Thorn. Nobody wants to talk about that.
But referentiality, though, it's not the first self-referential slasher, but it's the one everybody points to. It's the one that made everybody think this is worthwhile. This is something we can do. This is something that can breathe new life into the genre. Because if you think about it, if you break the slasher down as vaguely as possible, you've really got two types of film. You've got the one with the monster with no motive, and then you've got the whodunit with a vague motive. Scream combines both, because in both killers we get Stu, who is the abject monster who has no purpose beyond the fact that he wants to create chaos, and then you have Billy, who has a psychoanalytical reason. His motive is almost like quite similar to, like I say, Norman Bates or Mrs. Voorhees. He goes back to a Freudian level. You attack the mother, you must be dealt with, that kind of thing. Oh no, sorry, the father figure, whatever. But it combines both and it creates something new. So we don't have to go one way or another. We've got both. And then the series continues that, because in the sequel, again, you've got the killer with a motive, the mother who wants to avenge the son. And then you've got the lunatic who just was found on the internet. He wants to just stab people and become a court sensation. He wants to be the new OJ.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. So where does it actually fit, though? It's perfect time, perfect place. It was just one of those almost cinematic miracles that you couldn't have predicted.
Just for all of you, I mean, just going back on what you said, like, I mean, the more I watch Scream, and it's just because it's fresh in my head from rewatching it so recently in the cinema, Stu's the interesting character. Like, when you really sit and think about it, I mean, Stu's the kind of one is very much, as you've alluded to, John, and as you've mentioned, he's someone you can see it's a product of almost watching, of absorbing the horror movies and kind of absorbing that level of content and that influence it's had upon him. Billy is the kind of clear-cut, classic kind of slasher character. Stu's the interesting one. I don't know Zara, Gav, do you want to come in? You know, it's just something for me. I think. I mean, I also think there's a kind of the pseudo kind of this the almost sexual tension between the two of them, particularly in the finale. I kind of like the sense is that kind of it's going beyond levels of romance, which it's I have no issues at all with. I just think it's kind of nice like touch and kind of reading into the film. But I think the more I watch it, Stu's the character I think is the one who I wouldn't say interests me more, but probably terrifies me more in that sense. He's maybe Billy's the clear cut, as I've mentioned and as John's mentioned. He's clear motive. There's a clear idea on what he wants to do. As they jokingly say, it's all about the sequel, baby, all kind of thing. You don't know where does the gratification end with a character like Stu. And I know that Crime Scene to Screen, the kind of sister podcast, we need to talk about movies last year for the festival, kind of did look at the influence of some of the real life serial killers that kind of influenced and were influenced by Scream. That is an interesting. If you haven't seen it yet, I would definitely recommend seeking it out on our digital player. But Gav, Zara, yourselves, I mean, just on that note, you know, who terrifies you? I know it's a silly kind of, you know, silly question of the week, but of those two, I mean, who terrifies you more?
Go ahead, Zara. I'll let you go first.
Ready. I think, as you're saying, Billy's more a kind of clean-cut reason. Like, he's the guy that everyone's just sort of, you know, couldn't be Billy. But Stu, yeah. I mean, I sometimes have a problem with characters reenacting things they've seen in films or in games, because I think sometimes that's used as an argument against violence in films or violence in games, and if you play too many video games it'll make you like this, or you'll reenact all these things. So sometimes I have a little bit of an issue with characters acting out things that they've seen or recreating, and it works the other way around. I mean, what you're saying about the podcast that looked at serial killers being influenced by films, and there's so much of that documented. So in that respect, I always there's a little bit there that I just think, okay, not everyone watches a horror film and then wants to kill people, but some people do, and that's true. So yeah.
But I think Stu's an extremely interesting character, and we don't really know a lot about him. As the film progresses, he's kind of just Tatum's boyfriend who's just there, and he makes smart comments every so often, and he's a bit of comedy relief at times. And we don't know a lot about Stu, and I'd love to know more about his real motives. I know he explains it a little bit at the end, basically just by saying he's a bit mental, basically. But Billy's the mastermind, and I don't like when they use films and games to take the blame for these horrendous crimes either, because I think it's a bit of a lazy plot and a lazy bit of writing. But it works here because it's Stu's performance in that last scene, that last climax is just, it's on another level. And Matthew Lillard is just so good in this film. And just to go back a little bit to Jim, what you were saying earlier about I don't want to go into spoiler territory here, but there has been rumors about certain characters that maybe coming back that isn't in the trailer. I'm sort of torn because I would like to see the legacy characters returning that haven't been announced, but I don't want them to ruin their legacy by coming back just for like a cheap pop or something like that from the audience. So, but I love Matthew Lillard, and I think Stu is an amazing character, and I really, really wish we could get more, or we could learn a little bit more about him.
Yeah, it's that, as you kind of alluded, it's that double-edged sword. And it comes back to kind of, dare I venture into the Star Wars franchise, and it's that sense of, if you think of it, if you look at kind of Rise of Skywalker and what it tried to do, it tried to say, well, okay, Rise of Skywalker is a reaction to The Last Jedi, right? Everything you didn't like about that film, right? Okay, we can't bring Luke Skywalker back. Sorry, kids, spoiler. But, we can't do this, but we're not going to do this. We're not going to do that. Rey, she can't be nobody. She has to have lineage. She has to have this. So this is what you want. And you get a real mess of a film that just is blancmange. It's a nothing. There's a menace. Meh. It's a cinematic meh. And you're just left kind of going, well, if you give in to fandom and what they do and what you think fans think that they want, and I'm not saying, I always feel a bit self-conscious when I say about this, because, you know, we kind of think of, like, I've always alluded to this, like, sometimes fandom can be a bit like Kathy Bates in Misery, you know, it's kind of like, since you dirty birdie and this is not what you want and we're going to react, and if you don't give us what we want, we're going to be angry and we're going to be vocal. Usually it's a vocal minority, I will add and clarify, but I always think, like, fandom is a difficult thing to try and balance, and I really hope that they do, as you've said, Gav, I hope that they don't try to do that with this new Scream film by bringing a character like Stu back, who, I don't know about you, but I think if a TV fell in my head with a bit of electric, I don't think I would A, survive, and B, probably be in a fit state, 25 or so years later, to kind of go about and kind of try and do the things. Because I know, I mean, I suppose if you want to kind of talk about this, I know this is something I think Kevin Williamson muted, I think, for a few of the sequels, that I think Stu, I could be wrong on this, but I think they muted the point that Stu would survive, and then there would be is it the cults of, you know, well, John, you've already mentioned the cult of Thorn, how dare you, but we had the kind of the cult of Ghostface, and I think that was one of the ideas originally muted, I think, for Scream 4, I think is one point.
Who was originally supposed to be Mickey in part 2.
Yes, that's kind of it, and it's just a weird thing. I don't know about you, I mean, this is all conjecture, so we don't know. I don't know, unless Gav has secretly got a script that he has seen for the next film. I don't know. Would you want... I mean, we're all clearly here fans of the franchise, fans of the film. Would you want... I mean, where do you... I mean, is there that sense of, yes, you'd like to see that character back, but also that sense of, that would be really stupid. When you actually sit and think about it, I think that would be a really stupid thing to do. For that character to have not died, survived, and for Sidney Prescott not to be aware of that, and never basically... Because I don't think they ever... Well, I think she mentions a few times of... yeah, well, she does. Of course she mentions them a few times. But it's that sense of... I think that's a pretty big, glaring hole to kind of try and get over... You know, we've already had 3 sequels to get into this. I mean, I know we're into the world of conjecture now, but do you think the return of a character like that would it be what you would want from this new 5th installment? John,
No,
I'll come to you.
I'll
come to you first.
Sorry, John. Go ahead.
Basically, it wouldn't work to bring back a character, and it's not just the logistics of where they are, alive or dead, but each villain of the Scream franchise, their subtext is so tied into the era they were in. Like, Stu and Billy are the result of 20 years worth of moral panic, of people saying, like, for example, the Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel discussions on, you know, the cinematic assault on the woman, and then the parental groups that had said these horror films are awful for our children. Everything they said would happen ended up being shown and almost embodied by Stu and Billy. And then whenever we get to Mickey is the child of the internet that's just coming about. And Roman is a result of the rumors that something dark was happening in Hollywood. And then Jill is the dark personification of internet culture. You know, the fan, the star for 15 minutes kind of thing. You bring back any of those characters, they're no longer within their cultural era, and the subtext no longer works. So Stu would be a very problematic character to bring back. That moral panic has gone. It's come back in the form of video games, as was mentioned earlier. But I don't think we fear films in the same way as the parents of the 80s that would raise the children of the 90s believe.
Yeah.
And then Jill is the same, because I've seen a rumor that Jill will be coming back, but we've kind of moved beyond that, like the specific fear that she represented. So if somebody was to come back, it would need to be somebody fresh. But there is precedent for a character to return. Like the idea of Maureen Prescott haunting Sydney in part 3. Roman uses her voice, and not quite her image, but it's a very suggestive image that it is her. So anybody could come back, but I hope they don't.
Yeah, same here. What about you, Zara?
Yeah, same sort of as you said. It's a really a good point about, everyone's of their time, and everyone has a sort of reason to be there, and a reason for why they do what they do culturally as well, which I hadn't really thought about. That's quite cool. I mean, subverting expectations is what it's known for, but I think it's going to have to work a lot harder if it wants to impress today's audience. There was a really funny comment on the trailer on YouTube, and it said, somebody wrote, from the trailer, it says, "I've been through this a lot," and then wrote, "Yes, so have we." Like, we're all, we've all kind of grown up with this. So yeah, I think it's gonna. Well, this is the whole thing in the trailer, is that they say, it's someone from our past. So to some audiences, that's someone that we are familiar with, but my thought was, it's someone that they're familiar with that we're maybe not as familiar with. It's maybe a classmate that we didn't really, hone in on and kind of find out so much about. I think everyone will be going back to rewatch all the films now to kind of like, pick out a lot of random extras in the background and be like, it's probably going to be him, probably going to be her. But I think they'll probably try and do something interesting with maybe gender, I don't know, and kind of try to switch it up in terms of, because I know it was a lot of like violence enacted on women, and there's obviously been discussions about the fact that Sydney is this final girl and she survives, and so they might do something with that, and they might kind of subvert the genre slightly there, but I think they're going to have to try and think of something pretty cool, because I think we're all detectives now, and we're like, we got this figured out,
It's
So
gonna
it'll
be
be interesting.
it's gonna be Sydney's drug baron dad. That's who it's gonna be.
Yeah.
The guy who's like, yeah, I'm going to the Hilton Hotel, and like nobody has a reference, and no one seems to care, and he's never referenced ever again. He's clearly a drug baron. That's what
It's
I can
definitely him.
say. It's a bit like Kevin's
Mhm.
dad in Home Alone. How you paying for that house? I think we're on to you here. I think we know what you're up to do. You've mentioned it there, Zara. I alluded to this earlier on from rewatching the film so recently. I know that Scream is a film that is looking back at the tropes and the cliches within the horror genre, and it's bending those, and it's using those. We've got the rules, and it throws up this idea of, what if we had a cine literate teenagers who suddenly found themselves in a horror movie situation? What would they do? They know all the rules, they know all what to do, and they fucking just act the same. They do all the same mistakes they should. It's like, I think, isn't it, Sydney says there's she should be running outside instead of running. She's running upstairs, and I think it's like literally 2-3 minutes later she's doing that exact same thing. That's kind of part of the appeal to Scream, that it's so clever. But I do have issues with, and I don't want, as I said, and I'm not using that term, I'm not saying this to kind of force a response. I don't want this to be a woke look back and retrospective of Scream, but there is issues. Like, I mean, there's the line, I was kind of surprised, like I'd forgotten about it, because I think, is it Sydney says a line to Rose McGowan's character about Billy, why would you want to have a girlfriend that's sexually anorexic? And you're just like, I don't know. I don't know if 25 years on you would get away with a line like that. And I don't know, maybe I am looking for things that aren't there. Feel free to disregard what I'm saying and call me out, because I'm the person that's very kind of cautiously and very aware that I'm not a big fan of the new Candyman film, and I feel bad for not liking it, because I know a lot of other critics, and a lot of critics I respect, like it a lot, but I'm not a fan. But call me out here. I mean, I don't know. I just think there's, I suppose with everything, with 25 years, a lot of things have changed in that time. But there's certain aspects, I think, and I know it's playing with the final girls motif, and I know that it's playing with the sexual politics that we've come to expect from within the horror genre. But there's just certain things I think haven't aged well within Scream, and also the fact that, a bit like Nightmare on Elm Street, it's a largely white cast. I think, at least as the franchise has went on, we have got to see a bit of diversity on screen. But I mean, these are criticisms that have been hit with Wes Craven's films before, and I guess they were hit at the time and they've been hit with since. But I don't know, any of you from rewatching it, Denny, has any of those kind of issues with, particularly I suppose as we're talking and celebrating the 25th anniversary of the first film, of any of those issues with the Scream itself?
Well, yeah, there's definitely some lines of dialogue that doesn't sound very good in today's society, but I wouldn't normally be one that would look back on things that are 25 years old and say, oh, you couldn't say that today, because at the end of the day, this is fiction, they're fictional characters and they're not very nice characters, the people that are saying them anyway, so you're kind of supposed to hate them. That is kind of part of the idea behind it. I feel like Scream, the scripts are written, that they're put in there for a reason, and I feel like this new Scream will be very much like the previous Screams in terms of it'll have something to say about what's going on, or the generation, as John alluded to, about the killer having a connection to the generation that they were part of. And I feel I think they'll be less more about sexualizing it or gender, and more about maybe the idea that, and it comes back to Stu's character, we keep coming back to Stu for some reason, but I don't think he'll be in it, but I do like the idea that maybe there's some sort of group or something. I don't know, maybe they'll do more than 2 killers. I don't know. I feel like they do need to do something big. But and to answer your question, I wouldn't normally look back on things and criticize them, because at the end of the day, it's just fiction, really.
It's not so much a criticism. I guess it's just a sense that maybe now, as a supposed adult, I'm going to be 40 next year. I'm going to be 40 next year. And it's just, you find yourself just looking back at things and you just find yourself being surprised in the fact that I come back to that line. I mean, it just surprised me watching, and I'm not just saying this to try and get a response, but I mean, it did surprise me, that line of a girlfriend that's sexually anorexic. It's like it surprised me. It's like I forgot about it. It's like wow. I mean, I can't believe that didn't even get any response from me back at the time when I was watching it. And it's just that sense of just how maybe I've changed in that time, and it's just looking back at things, you're just going to go, yeah, okay, that's changed for the better. You wouldn't get that level of dialogue. John, Zara, maybe I'm just digging myself a hole. This is what I usually tend to do when I get on these podcasts, but it's just that sense of, and I'm not, as I say, I'm not here to bash and knock a film, but it's just, there's certain things I think with all films we look back. We're talking about Halloween. You could look back at films from that era, and you can look at that and you can say, well, that hasn't aged well, that hasn't aged well. There's certain just an inevitability of that. But I guess it's just, it would be wrong to not draw attention to those things now as we're sitting here in 2021.
Well, just referring back to the line where you were talking about the sexual anorexia, Kevin Williamson, I think, is very inspired by Kevin Smith, because Clerks came out 2 years beforehand and it has a very similar style of dialogue, but Kevin Williamson slows it down. It's more about the flow of what's being said rather than what's actually being said. And then there's an edgy quality to it to get the joke, because this was the 90s. So I feel like this is basically Clerks, but in a horror situation. So you're going to get dialogue like that. And as well, if you think about it, there was a lot of problematic cinematic moments in this era. Like, as Scream 3 was just about to come out in cinema, 3 or 4 months earlier, we watched one of cinema's early digital sex crimes in American Pie. A lot of bad things were going on in cinema of that era. And funnily enough, if you looked at the horror films and the teen sex comedies that came out in the same years, you can draw a lot of parallels between some of the horrors that were being hidden and normalized back then, stuff that now that we realize is problematic.
Yeah, it is true. Like, I mean, I remember at the time, kind of, it was only so recently, like, I mean, we are veering off topic here, I know, but that's kind of what Bandflix and the Dark Ages we kind of do. We do it to a T. But I always remember, or at the time The Hangover came out, and I mean, I'm not going to say like Hangover is a problematic film. There's no denying that, particularly as it went on. I'm not a fan of The Hangover, but I remember the time going, oh, we have stuff like 40-Year-Old Virgin. It's so much lighter and different in comparison. But yeah, there's even within a film like that, you look back and go, okay, I completely overlooked that, didn't realize that, and you kind of look back and go, really, they got away with that dialogue and that sense, and you're just like, oh, okay, it was like, okay, everything, my world is, I feel like Neo in the Matrix, and just kind of, I've finally taken, is it the red pill, and just suddenly had himself a realization. But anyway, it is very true. I mean, there's a lot of films, and it's, I guess what I'm trying to say is we always think that these are films that we hit with this stick are from, 40 or 50 years old. Now, here's Scream. It's relatively young. It's only 25 years of age. And here, I suppose that's the point, maybe in my typical roundabout, arse-about-face way, is that here's a film from only 25 years ago, and it's still got a lot of those problems. And yeah, you've mentioned Kevin Smith and Kevin Williamson. Kevin Smith, what a fantastic screenwriter he was until he discovered cannabis. But hey, I still love you, Kevin. I still...
Just on that point, sorry.
Go on ahead.
No, I was just about to say that, funny enough, you mentioned that about a film from 25 years ago, but Halloween, you looked at a film from over 40 years ago now, and it's got really healthy sexual relationships between most of the cast. Everybody's nice and happy with each other, and a few years later, it was a bit downhill.
Yeah. What about you, Zara? Where we're gonna bring you in and pull you into this conversation, drag you into this conversation?
No, I think it is important to bring it up. I think it's a good point, well made. And I think the thing is just that we don't really use language like that anymore. And I think in the 90s there was very much I mean, it's obviously, it knew its audience, it knew the type of language that they would be kind of receptive to and would think was kind of funny or edgy or cool. And things that were maybe trendy to say back then. I mean, maybe not over the line so much, but things that they knew that high schoolers or teenagers, there's trends in language that happen all the time, and there'll probably be things that are in films now that we'll look back on and be like, how did they say things like that? Trump's tweets and things, we'll just be like, whoa. I mean, even now we're like, whoa. But yeah, so I think it's definitely, but I think every era and every film is of its time. It's only the rules that are in society at that time, the technology that's available. We can look back on anything and say, oh, well, that wasn't very, well made or well marketed, or, but everything is kind of a slave to its time and is kind of a product of what was going on. So I think we can look back on it and say, there was definitely maybe more inclusivity needed, maybe more diversity. But, all we can kind of do is now include that in films today, and hopefully going forward, kind of try to rectify that a little bit.
Yeah, and they tried to rectify it with the Scream TV series. So there we go. The Scream TV series, just deep down, just wasn't that bad. Look, we have been talking now for just over an hour. I think this has turned into a slightly longer panel. It's I'm on hosting duty, so of course that's going to happen. Everybody else has done their hour remit. I've went slightly over that remit, but we have been talking for quite some time. So at this stage, we will start to bring things to a close. And I guess at this stage, I'll just throw it out simply, to any of you. I mean, is there anything you feel that we haven't mentioned or anything we haven't really talked about? I'll come to you first, John. Is there anything you feel that we've maybe overlooked as we've been retrospectively looking back on Scream 25 years on?
I would kick myself if I didn't bring this up, but Randy's rules is an interesting part to me. It's these set of ideas that he throws out there. You can't have sex, you can't drink, you can't do drugs, you can't use certain language. Like, I'll be right back. They're kind of strange to me because the film subverts them as it's supposed to do. That's what the film's job is. But it's rules that aren't really in place in the genre in the classical era. We always think that the survivor's a virgin. But for example, if you looked at Jamie Lee Curtis as Laurie Strode, she's shy. She's not necessarily a virgin. She's shy. Or if you look at Nancy from Nightmare on Elm Street, she's got a boyfriend. It's clearly long term. She pushes off sex, but it's only to make sure Tina's fine, and then to defeat Freddy. There's not really indicating that they are virginal. What a better word would be innocent. but then a conservative morality confuses the two. They think that innocence is virginity, but and then the drugs and alcohol. How many Friday the 13th films feature a party where everybody's drinking or smoking grass or having sex, and one of those will survive who has partaken in some form of social transgression? So I was saying I was going to kick myself if I didn't mention the conservative morality that's put on the classical era, which didn't actually exist. It was more the reception listed in there, and Scream uses that as the focal point.
What would you say would be the rules now, 25 years on? How do you think those rules would have changed now? If Randy was making up his rules now, what would you say kind of be the rule to survive in a horror film now?
As I'm currently putting in my thesis right now, there's one rule: get the fuck out of there.
I was going to say run out the front door and run away.
If has anybody seen the film The Rise of Leslie Vernon?
No, that's Robert Englund, isn't it? Is it Robert Englund?
He plays a Donald Pleasance style role. But it's basically this look at a slasher film that's about to arise. Michael, Freddy, and Jason are real in this world. They're just regular slasher films, but it takes you through his preparation before his launch event, basically, which is the slaughter of a group of teens. And the documentary crew follows him, and half it's done in documentary form, the other half is done in cinematic form. But he goes through the roles a lot better. It takes out the moralisms and looks at the actual reality that we see in these films rather than what we put on these films. And the big rule is, well, you can have sex, you can drink, you can smoke, you can have whatever kind of fun you want. You could commit any social transgression or crime. All you have to do is leave the environment. Like Friday the 13th Part 2, when Ted takes a group of counselors off to drink for the night, they go to an after hours pub, they party, and they make it through. There's a lot of that in slasher films that aren't really talked about, but get out of there. That's the one and only rule.
I'm jealous of you, John. I'm jealous that you get to do the thesis in that, because I did politics and I had to write about 9/11 and post 9/11 paranoia. I would have had far more fun. I blame my parents for just not letting me kind of pursue my dreams and do that. I was told I had to pursue a proper kind of degree in the time. I'm not degrading. I'm just making that clear. This was my parents' attitude.
Don't worry, I get to write 100,000 words on slasher films. I am ecstatic.
I know, but I love the fact that you're going to have to write 100,000 words in that. But it's basically when you boil it all down, it's just get the fuck out of there.
Get the fuck out of there. That's simple as. Yeah. Jason's not going to cross the periphery.
John Kavanagh presents "Get the Fuck Out of There." There we go. But
it's my remake of Get Out.
Yeah, Zara, any kind of what you're going to be your kind of throw in for the rules for now in 2021 for surviving a horror film?
Gosh, I don't know. I don't think I have as eloquent an answer as John. Just don't be on your phone. Is that a good one? I feel like we'd all be so like people would be being cut and we would just be like, oh, they left me on red. You know, I feel like there would be kind of everyone be in a room on their phone, maybe be aware of your environment. I don't know, carry some kind of weapon, maybe like a Swiss Army knife. I don't know what's cool now to like have as your defense mechanism. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I would try to like chat absolute shit and make them really bored or be really annoyed and just be like, ugh, I don't know what I would do. I've been running a lot though recently. I feel like my stamina is really good, so they're not getting me.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna keep going.
You've been following the rules from Zombieland. Good cardio. That's what you've been going for.
There we go. Yeah.
That's my downfall. That's my downfall completely. I'll be on. Well, okay. Unless that person's you, Zara, I don't have to be faster than everybody. I just have to be faster than one other person. Now that's my flaw. 'Cause I probably won't be faster than another person. I'll be the one that'll be left behind. But my rule that I'm going to come up with is just be nice enough that someone will be prepared to come back foolishly to get you. That's my rule to survive in the horror film. So don't be a complete and utter dick. You can be sarcastic and you be that, but be nice enough that someone's going to go, oh, fuck, Jim's back there. We'll have to go back and get him, and then they'll get got, and then I'll survive. I'll have to live with the survivor's guilt, but I'll still be alive. I'll still be alive. So that's
You'll
what
get
I'm
over
going
the
to.
guilt.
That's what I'm going to. I'll have to get over the guilt, and then it'll probably form the catalyst for my inspiration for becoming the killer in the next pseudo horror film. There we go. And hopefully I'll have upped my cardio game by then. But Gav, I'm not quite sure where we started out with this, but this has now literally just become kind of what is your rule for surviving a horror movie in 2021?
Well, my cardio is awful, so I'm going to steal Zara's answer and say have a good weapon or choose the correct weapon. So I'm going to modify it a little bit. You know, it's a lot. I see a lot of people trying to, you know, kill Michael Myers with a knife, and it's just like no. You know, I know he comes back no matter how you kill him, but you know, choose your correct weapon and be a gifter. You know, give them something nice that they might like. And if you know if they receive something nice, they might just be like, "Oh, I'll let you live," and kind of steal your idea, Jim. Be a nice guy.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, because you've got loads of stuff behind you, Gav. You could just offer up the Michael Myers mask. There you go.
He's not getting any of this.
Nah,
no.
You're fucked. You're fucked then, man. That's.
I'd be dead in the first scene, like definitely.
That's the one. You'll be our film's Drew Barrymore. That's the way it's going to work. They'll go. There's Gav. He's going to know the rules. Oh no, he's gone. Oh well.
I'd be quite happy to be Drew Barrymore, no problem.
That's all right. So look, yeah. So I mean, I think I've remembered now where we started out in this kind of long attempted kind of to wrap things up. Zara, Gav, anything you feel that we haven't kind of addressed or anything? Now is the chance to speak or forever hold your peace, all until the 30th anniversary, until then, or the 25th anniversary, which is next year of Scream 2. We'll all get back together and do a panel about Scream 2. But now is your chance until then to talk about kind of anything else we haven't had a chance to talk about yet.
No, I think we pretty much touched on everything there.
Yeah, I think so.
I just want to say I think Randy is one of the best characters in the Scream series. And it's a shame he won't be coming back.
Do you know what, though, on that note, I think there's going to be some tenuous way that he's going to be brought back. Because I think it's quite clever how they bring him back in 3. And I'm kind of hoping... I don't think Randy's not back in 4, is he? It's been that while since I've seen it. No, I think he's referenced, but I don't think he's seen. I don't know. There'll be some weird. He'll have got ahead of the game and he'll have recorded something onto a USB stick, and it'll be this is the rules for that. I don't know. I'd be more on board with that than other characters coming back to be revealed to be the murder. Murder. That's what I'm hoping for. But yeah, I do want for the Scream 5, Scream Legacy, I just want to know what the hell does Sidney Prescott's dad get up to? I'm just going off on a business trip, Sidney. Let's say no more about that. Zara, you know, I know you kind of, I get a sense you're agreeing with Gav. Anything you want to kind of mention just before we wrap things up?
I'm excited for January for the next film. And I kind of do hope that it's some kind of pre-recorded, I did all this before I died, because I'm just that, forward thinking. I had my diary all worked out. So yeah, that level of organization would really appeal to me. So I'm here for it if that's the direction they want to go in.
Yeah, I just don't know if Randy's that level of organised, but we're gonna have to wait and see. I think what we're talking about kind of reconvening this little panel for the Scream 2 25th anniversary. Maybe we'll all reconvene for the Scream review when it's all out in January. But yeah, I think everything. I'm sure there's people now at the point screaming who are either watching or listening to this panel going, why did you not mention this? Why did you not mention that? I'm sorry, we only have an allocated amount of time and I talk nonsense and I digress. So I apologise. I take full responsibility for anything that has not been mentioned. So look, we're going to bring this panel to a close. It's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed it. I enjoy geeking out all the time. So look, all that's left for me to do now is thank all my panellists. So thank you very much, John.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Zara.
Thank you very much, Jim.
And thank you very much, Gav.
Thank you very much for having me on.
And hopefully you're enjoying these little virtual panels as part of the Dark Hedges International Film Festival. Maybe you've even been out to a few of our screenings. Maybe you've been watching some of our content online. So thank you for watching. Thank you for checking out anything else in the digital player. And if you haven't, go do it now. Go watch stuff. It's okay, you can leave now. We've said all the good stuff. You can go watch it now. But anyway, so that's us. So thank you very much. So goodbye.
Bye.